Good morning, Big Ten fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Big Ten Morning Minutes. I'm your host, Michael Chen. It is March 6, 2019, and the Big Ten schools across the conference have all started to get spring practice going, and there's plenty of notes from a few of the schools that have started to do that. We'll start off with the Buckeyes, as they announced yesterday that Ryan Day and his staff will be without two returning starters for the spring, in safety Jordan Fuller and offensive tackle Thayer Munford. I think the loss of Munford is more significant than it is for Fuller. Fuller has been part of the Buckeye program for a few years, so obvious what the safety can do. However, the fact that the Buckeyes have lost the other four starting offensive linemen, and continuity is huge on an offensive line. Being able to have conversations, I wouldn't necessarily say conversations, but just having the feel for your fellow offensive linemen. It's not necessarily always just talent. I think that's a group that needs to mesh, that needs to know when to pick up blitzes, when to pick up stunts and twists, etc. Having good communication between the five of them is very, very important. And when you're having to replace four of the five starters, and then you have the opportunity to get that work in during the spring, you're missing out on that type of communication that they would have normally. And unfortunately for the Buckeyes, with having to replace the four starters, it's going to be a little bit difficult early on in the season, I believe, to mesh for the offensive line. Although they definitely have talent. Obviously, the Buckeyes have recruited very well under Urban Meyer and obviously now under Ryan Day. But it still would have been nice to see, obviously, the five get a chance to practice for a month and a half and then culminate in a spring game. But it's unfortunate for the Buckeyes. Yesterday, Scott Frost, Nebraska's head coach, met with the media and filled everyone in on the Maurice Washington situation. Washington will participate in spring practice for the Cornhuskers. He won't necessarily be involved in all of the practices, as he has to probably travel back and forth between Lincoln and California, his home state, to get the legal issues resolved. And if you don't remember, I reported a few months ago that Washington was involved in a little incident in high school where he passed on a 10-second video of his former girlfriend being domestically abused. And although it wasn't Washington doing the video, this is obviously something that Washington should not have been spreading around. I'm not quite sure how Nebraska will end up handling this. It doesn't look like they're going to suspend him or anything, although I would still suspend him for a game early on in the season. Just say, hey, look, young man, this is unacceptable. The behavior like this, you just can't get away with. So if I'm Scott Frost, I think although you still have to wait out what the legal ramifications are of this, I still think that at minimum Washington should get a one-game suspension. But we'll see how Frost ends up handling that situation. Yesterday, the NFL.com's Chad Reeder came out with his all-combine team, and it had a heavy Big Ten flair, as a lot of former Big Ten players fared very well in the combine. We'll start off on the offensive side with Ohio State's quarterback, Dwayne Haskins. I'm not sure if he was necessarily solidified his status as the number one quarterback because of all the rumors of Kyler Murray going to Arizona. But I still think Haskins, from the videos I saw online and some of the breakdown of what he did at the combine, I still think he solidified himself as an early round pick, although possibly not the first quarterback. Miles Sanders and Mike Weber, the former Penn State Sanders, Ohio State Weber running backs, they fared well. I think Sanders isn't talked about enough, to be honest with you. I think he had a terrific combine. I think he's not necessarily a first-round pick, neither is Weber, but I think that they'll be second-day guys. I think, You've seen elite running backs go in the first round a little bit more often recently. Although these two guys aren't the elite, I still think that they are very solid running backs, and they should see their names being called early on in the draft. And then again, wide receivers, you're looking at two Buckeyes in Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin. Both of them tested extremely well, ran very fast in their 40s, showed off some very impressive athleticism in broad jumps and with their vertical jumps as well. And then, to nobody's surprise, the pair of Iowa's tight ends, Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, they obviously tested very well, and they performed very well at Indianapolis in the Combine. You just can't say enough about these two guys as the combination of tight ends. I mean, Kirk Ferentz has absolutely done a fantastic job of developing tight ends just now, obviously, and previously in the past. He's really put out a bunch of tight ends to the NFL, and you're looking at two potential guys that could go in the first round. We've seen Fant and Hawkinson all over first-round drafts, first-round mocks. So we'll see where they end up going, but very good job there done by those two tight ends. And then on the offensive line, the last guy on Reader's list was guard Michael Jordan from Ohio State. He tested well, obviously, and Jordan left early after his third season as a starter, which you don't really see at Ohio State very often, so you kind of understood why Jordan was leaving. And obviously he made the right decision, because it looks like he's going to be drafted highly as well, although, again, probably not a first-round talent. Still should hear his name called fairly early in the draft. And then moving on to the defensive side, you're going to find two Michigan defenders in Rashawn Gary and Devin Bush. Although Gary didn't necessarily put up eye-popping stats at Michigan, he is quite the elite athlete, as he showed at the Combine. I was a little bit surprised by the fact that Devin Bush tested so well. In the games that I saw, he looked a little bit slow, but he still ran very well, and he obviously is a smart young man, because he wowed everybody in the conversations he had with some teams. So good job there by Devin Bush. His production on the field was fantastic, but to me, he looked a step slow, but definitely proved me wrong. So well done by Devin Bush. And then one more name was Maryland safety Darnell Savage. Performed well as well. So although Savage, again, probably not a first-round pick, Savage definitely improved his draft stock at the Combine in Indianapolis. And then one basketball note as we move over to the hardwood, Caleb Wesson's suspension for Ohio State is going to continue again against Northwestern. Chris Holtman has announced that he is unsure of when Wesson's suspension will end, so we'll keep an eye on that, as Wesson is obviously Ohio State's most important piece of their team, and when they lose him, they definitely have lost a lot of offense and a lot of defense as well, because Wesson is what makes that team go. And when they miss him, when he's got foul trouble, when he's actually playing and eligible to play, they definitely miss him a lot. So that's unfortunate for the Buckeyes, as they're on the bubble to potentially make the NCAA tournament. So they're going to have to get a win tonight at Northwestern, and potentially a couple more wins in the Big Ten tournament to solidify a spot in the NCAAs. Otherwise, most likely they're headed for an NIT bid. And that's going to do it for me for this morning on your Big Ten Morning Minutes. I've been your host, Michael Chen. I appreciate the listen. Have a great Wednesday, Big Ten fans.